You probably heard that Elon Musk bought Twitter, right? But you may have missed the fact that now Biden wants a Ministry of Truth. You know, a government agency that tells you what is the truth and what isn't the truth. Just in case you weren't paying attention.
First and foremost, to my perfect wife.
Don't tell me what Can I go with Jess alone? Very good.
We met before. It's hard to forget those eyes.
Oh, wait, no, come on.
Okay.
Come on,
All right,
we
so
get
hold
you
five.
right over here.
There you go.
You can put it away if you want. Remember what you said to my mom? It was wonderful. My mom loved it.
1 minute, Angel. Do you want to hold it? Here, lollipop. It's going to come in your
got
mouth.
us all?
Just look at the camera, and
okay.
we're going to have lollipop. It's going to go in your mouth right after, right after.
Keep going. You're going to stand right next to me. There you go. And then we're going to have...
There you go.
Got it? Okay.
And the people in the back, if you could spread out a little bit.
You're good. Do you remember that, Jordan? No, not smile. No date till you're 30. Hey, Angel, how old are you? You're 12. What's your name? How are you? The problem is, you know, you guys, you got a hard time. All right, sister. I like kids better than people.
Yeah.
Can you get some over here?
Okay.
Grandpa's one of those guys.
That's nice of you to
No,
say.
I'm not saying. He knows it. Do you know what my dad used to say? His granddaughters have one important job.
Now, the reason that's so important is that this is not an uncommon occurrence. And of course, in Hollywood and movies and TV shows and UFO conferences, these are all presented as menacing aliens from outer space. And of course, I found out in 92, 93, 94 that in fact, we had highly classified projects that were manufacturing the fake aliens, and that phenomenon was launched not just in the United States but all over the world to cover up the presence. It created a sort of distraction, misdirect of the actual ETs. Now, this is really important for the people in the CE5 contact community to understand, because there's an endless number of people dealing with these conspiracy concepts of, you know, the good aliens and the bad aliens working with the secret government, and this narrative and that narrative. And there have been people in bases seeing these little guys running around in military bases. But of course, the people observing that, those military people, didn't know that those were not indigenous, let's say from another planet, but were basically very advanced robotics that looked lifelike. But I mean, really advanced and nanomolecular. I mean, very sophisticated. We're not talking, you know, a robot at GM putting a bolt on a car. Very, very convincingly looking like a living extraterrestrial. Now, this has been really hard for me to say these things to the public because it's not popular. People have their belief systems based on their fear and then from that hatred. But it's very important that this is now coming out in some very good, excruciating detail. And of course, this account, and we have this whistleblower, military whistleblowers, credentials, information, et cetera, that's being provided to the proper U.S. government authorities down to the level of specifics, operational details, et cetera. Why? Because that's the only way these folks are going to get into the system. is getting them that kind of actionable intelligence, as we call it. And that is really important.
We're taught that Chicago was built in the 1800s, but there's so much with that narrative that doesn't add up that it leads us to believe that there's something that was left out of the official history books. In 1605, a map published in Venice shows North America with many old world cities. Notice that the symbol to represent these cities is some type of red castle. Supposedly at the time that this was written, there was no English-speaking settlements on the North American continent. In the middle of the continent, past the end of the St. Lawrence River, appears the name Shalaga. And we can see this in a variety of different maps. It's right in the exact same place that Chicago would appear, and obviously, the name is extremely close. In 1894, the Chicago Tribune actually mentioned Shalaga being on a map from 1615. Chicago or Shalaga on an old map. Quote, President Harper of the University of Chicago has lately received a quaint map of the world. This map was presented to President Harper by Dr. Charles Richter, the Imperial German Representative Commissioner to the World's Fair. Now isn't that interesting? It continues, the following letter of presentation accompanies the map. Quote, W.R. Harper, President of the University of Chicago. Dear Sir, when during the early preparatory stages of the exposition work efforts were made mainly upon the investigation of Mr. Curtis to collect maps, supposition be correct, it is most likely on this map the name of Chicago in its original form appears for the first time. Quote, Herr Professor Graf of Dresden, who has taken a prominent interest in the researches to which the Chicago Exposition and the historic events underlying its existence have given so powerful an impulse, has upon a request arranged for a photographic reproduction of the maps in question. And as the representative of this commission and on behalf of Herr Professor Graf, I have the honor to request you to accept a copy of the same with the request that you give it an appropriate place in your university. And with the hope, also, that it will prove the warm interest that Germany has taken of old in that far-off period of history. I trust that you will accept this small token of esteem in the spirit in which it is given as a mark of appreciation, however inadequate, of the energetic efforts that are being made towards the propagation of science and education by the Chicago institutions generally, and your university especially, and as a manifestation of the interest which German scientists have taken. End quote. Okay, so Dr. Charles Richter was the Imperial German Representative Commissioner to the World's Fair, and it seems that he was trying to write to the university professor and attempt to speak about Shalaga appearing on old maps, and he even alludes to it having a connection with Germany. Obviously, there was some interest by people who knew not of the origins of the World Fairs into Chicago's ancient origins. But this is kind of where it gets even crazier. The newspaper actually had a follow-up 6 days later where they attempt to cover this whole thing up. Let's remember now that we understand the orphan asylums and that most of these people, especially the journalists and the German migrants, they wouldn't know the full history of this city. That knowledge would only be known by the secret orders who own the buildings and perhaps some higher-ups at these colleges. Now the headline of the newspaper reads, Shalaga is not the same as Chicago. Someone named C.F. Gunther writes in and says, quote, in the Tribune of Sunday, there appeared a map lately sent to President Harper of the University by Dr. Charles Richter, Imperial German Representative Commissioner, which is supposed to represent the oldest appearance of the name of Chicago, namely 1615. As no one questions this assumption, I am frank to say that it is unquestionably an error in every respect. It is not true that the so-called Shalaga on this map is at the exact point where the marvelous city is now located, but on the contrary, the country is marked Mexicana. Again, the so-called St. Lawrence River is not so far south. This river was well known at the time and should be at the top of the map. Hence, this is also a far-fetched assumption. It is self-evident that no one would put Chicago on a river running up in Mexico, for Chicago, situated on a chain of lakes nearly 1,000 miles long, omitting these lakes entirely and place it on a river going into Mexico. He continues trying to prove this Mexico argument and that Shalaga is actually spelled Shalapa. Now, this makes it very obvious that they didn't want this to be looked into at all, because the truth is, Shalaga is not spelled Shalapa, and it's on several maps in the 1500s. Many of the maps that show Shalaga closer south have been distorted, as with the German plate, but there are maps that show it in its correct position. Also, just because the map said Mexicana doesn't mean anything. In fact, Mexicana is said to have been all of California, Florida, Nova France, Norumbega, Quivira, and many more. It wasn't literally just in Mexico. And it's very strange that someone at the university actually said this and ignored that Shalaga is actually accurately placed on Mercator's map, so there's obviously some type of cover-up going on. Also, another argument made is that Hochelaga appears on several maps and that Shalaga is some corruption of that, but I think Hochelaga must have been some type of smaller settlement made around the ruins of Shalaga, possibly by cannibalistic tribes as mentioned in many books around this time. But this got me looking into the University of Chicago, and I mean, just take a look at this building, which was also graciously funded by John D. Rockefeller. So yeah, it's another castle, but I mean, just think about it. Why would the college try to cover up Shalaga? Well, it's because the officials, or those who were in control of Chicago at the time, were secret society orphans who had repopulated the city and educated the population. By this time in 1890, most of Chicago's population was transported in, and the people had no clue who actually built these structures. Just look at the University of Chicago's emblem in 1890. Looks like we have a griffin in flames. Maybe they're trying to tell us something? They tell us that Chicago was raised afoot because of swampland flooding. They tell us that they built a tunnel under the Chicago River. They tell us that there was a great fire, yet when we look at the old pictures of Chicago, it looks like a bomb went off. They tell us that Chicago's World Fair was built in less than 3 years. Even if this was done with plaster, this would have been a massive undertaking. Just look at these structures. Does this look temporary to you? The purpose of these fairs were to indoctrinate, and I wouldn't be surprised if people began asking questions. I mean, look at Dr. Charles. He obviously was curious to Chicago's ancient origins, since it has been depicted in maps, and they were probably curious about who built all these structures, and so maybe the officials decided that they had to get rid of it, so they destroyed everything. These structures were not built in the 1800s. Chicago was an old world Tartarian city. It's even on Mercator's map from 1569, so why when you look up Shalaga does it say that it's only on a map in 1605? Very strange, right? And on the Mercator's map there's a series of texts with Latin legends that actually talk about Tartaria. He mentions the Tartars almost 20 times on this map, and it's possible that they're the actual source for where Mercator actually got his info. He talks about a King John who had taken over the country of Tartaria, and basically in order to quell rebellion, he decided to disperse them into different countries, breaking their power of rebellion. But the Tartars were unwilling to give up their kinship, and of mutual association, they made a vow and fled to the northward where they seized a very vast country. So Mercator was well aware of the Tartarians, and if they had complete control of the east, it's not that far of a stretch to assume that they would attempt to pass the Bering Strait. If we look at Arzareth, which is the land beyond the Great River, far away from the habitation of man, in which the 10 tribes of Israel will dwell, observing the laws of Moses until the time of restoration, Arzareth was clearly in Tartaria, right by the Bering Strait. The Tartarians, then trying to flee whatever king or parasites were trying to take over, they crossed into America and began creating cities, one of them being Shalaga. In America, being the latest and most accurate description of the New World, we actually have a paragraph that speaks of this exact situation. Quote, "The other Tartary, which certainly was the first nursery, from hence the Americans were transplanted. Tartary, or Tatary, so called from the river Tatar, which runs through the country Mongol into the Northern Ocean, covers a great part of the terrestrial globe. The lesser Tartary makes out a considerable part of Europe, the greater is Asia." Now we must inquire from what Tartars the Americans extracted. Mornius, Postellus, Jean-Bardus, Poterus, and others are of the opinion that the Tartars, which about the year 1228, under the command of Zingis Khan, overspread the earth like a deluge, where the successors to the 10 tribes of Israel, which were carried into captivity to Assyria by Salmanazar, the Tartary, or rather Tartaria, seems to be some testimony thereof, because it signifies in the Syrian or Hebrew tongue remnants or remainders, as seemingly because these Tartarians were remainders of the forementioned tribes. End quote. So you tell me, what do you think? Is Chicago the ancient mythical city of Shalaga? If we connect this with the Chicago World Fair, then it actually starts to make a lot more sense.
Souvenir notebook from the World's Fair of Chicago, along with the passports that we have seen, especially the early ones, in the 1800s. This notebook of 1897 seems to paint a different picture of the World's Fair and what may have been going on. More of a school as opposed to a fair. This is not the Mississippi that I remember. This is not at all the feeling I get when I think of Mississippi. And here I guarantee there are people from Mississippi watching this video that have never seen this photo before. And I've seen some of this expo, but this may as well be the first time for me, once again. And forgive me, this is Omaha, Nebraska. That's even weirder. Everything still applies. Not the Nebraska that anybody conceives of in America. When we in America think of Nebraska, we think of nothing. Flat, barren lands, now filled with corn and cattle and nothing. And yet here it is, or was, of course. This will have all been torn down to Chicago, pre-fire 1871. And we see the same scenario as we do in all cities. Very few people on the streets. Streets of mud. One of the most baffling clues lending to the idea that these people did not construct these cities. Here we see the intersection of LaSalle and Washington Street. Once again, solid buildings and streets of mud. And this architecture is too sophisticated for the conditions that these people are living in. Here, a car company. This is a hotel, and it's been turned into this Pullman Palace car company. Even they know it's a palace. They're just going to call it the Pullman Palace. Can you even pull a car into this facility? Booksellers Row. Here you go. So many book printing, this and that. It's like the only thing they knew how to do was print books. And it would have been very important, as they were actively rewriting history. And the courthouse, 1870. Brand new, we would be told. Why does it look like it's old and burnt? And why does it look like this? Come on, 1870? Again, streets of mud. One old cypress tree. Not so old, but there's not much vegetation. But yet not new construction. I mean, here they're telling us the wings were just added. Nothing has been added here. This is perfectly preserved from the past. And here, the open confession and salute to the controllers. And this is it. These guys would shape the future. These guys are in part responsible for why most people do not see these buildings as a part of America or every part of the realm. A unified people that were building in this style everywhere. And here it would be brought down to help facilitate the writing of a new history.